Okay. So I thank you for the invitation. It was a little bit difficult, but I'm particularly happy to be here today. And yes, I will present. I was given this interesting title, and I decided to divide it and try to talk a little bit about all those concepts. I want to enter into the evidence of interventions because I'm sure that in the previous days you have looked into details to various bits of evidence in support of several interventions. As Gilberto said before, I work at the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction. It's difficult to see people there. It's the European Union Agency for Drugs. And we work in close collaboration with all the 28 countries, plus the other participant countries, including the North African ones. And our mandate is to provide factual, objective, reliable, uncomparable information to inform decision-making. So as I said before, I will say a little bit about treatment effectiveness, why and how, evidence-based approach and treatment of drug use disorders. This is a nice graph I found on a journal. It's by a hematologist, but it's nice because it tells succinctly the story of why we are talking, all of us talking about evidence. This comes from the evidence-based medicine introduced by the man there, who is Archibald Cochrane, and the other, that is David Sackett. So in the idea of this graph designer, one planted the tree and the other watered it. So Archibald Cochrane was an English medical doctor with a very interesting career. He worked in with the military, and then he worked with the miners. And he pointed out to the fact that there were evidence already available, and a very important one, that was not applied in practice because lack of knowledge, because there were two separate words. One was the word of research, and the other was the word of practice. And this is David Sackett that wrote an editorial in the middle 90s called Evidence-Based Medicine, What It Is and What It Is Not, and himself admitted a few years after that was surprised by the success of this key term that became common in the language of those providing health interventions. Now, one of the observations, of the most dramatic observation by Archibald Cochrane can be seen in this meta-analysis. It's an old photocopy. I wanted to have it an old photocopy because it says how long time ago, in the 70s, we had the evidence that giving corticosteroids to pregnant women at risk of premature delivery saved the life of the newborn babies, permitting the maturation of the lungs. And how much later, at least 20 years later, this easy intervention came into the practice. This is a story that our scientific director at the MCDDA wrote as a chapter of this textbook by the International Society for Addiction Medicine. A lot of colleagues I see here also contributed to this book. And so, as we said before, it can happen that at least 20 years were needed before something that we knew already were into the practice. And I know that some of you are thinking of another intervention that followed the similar situation. These two medical doctors, Dole and Ms. Vander, I'm sure they have been mentioned before in this meeting. And in the 1966, they produced this article saying that opioid substitution treatment could be an option for drug users. What has happened after? We had the Cochrane collaboration meta-analysis showing the effectiveness of this intervention, at least in two dimensions, the reduction of drug use and the reduction of mortality in this meta-analysis is less evident, is not statistically significant, but this is a meta-analysis by 2003. It has been updated several times since then. We have the standards by UNODC and WHO. We have the guidelines by WHO in 2009. Vladimir sit here is one of the starter of these very important guidelines that are applied in a lot, at least, of European countries, but we are still there. As you can see, this intervention that has been proved so many years ago is not so fully implemented everywhere. So we need to improve the dissemination. We at the EMCDDA do our little bit. We have this web page, is the best practice portal. As you see, we try to strengthen the collaboration with a lot of organizations, the Cochrane collaboration I mentioned before, the World Health Organization, some specific project that helps either to synthesize evidence and to communicate to policymakers. That is a very difficult task. I appreciated very much the intervention before by Professor Piazza, because he was able to say something so complex in a way that even me understood something. So this is the direction in which we should go. We also do a lot of different publications on several topics. So we are not only focused on opioid dependence. It has been mentioned before that in Europe there are other types of problems. For example, cannabis dependence and new psychoactive substances dependence. So what is the story of treatment effectiveness? Evidence-based medicine was started at the beginning by some pioneers. It was like an utopia. And then it was debated. You can find a lot of articles and discussions about the fact that experimental evidence cannot be applied to real-world patients, and then enter into the common language. You find these definitions elsewhere in many different disciplines, not only on the medical and the social aspect. For example, this is Danilo is distracted. This is the European Union. Danilo Ballotta, my colleague, sat in first row at the right. This is the European Union drug strategy. Evidence-based is mentioned 13 times, and this is related to interventions, related to policy. So it is a concept that now has been consolidated. This is quite a recent initiative. The 15th of September, the Council of the European Union adopted these conclusions about quality standards in drug demand dependence, in drugs demand reduction. It has a long story. I see Michael Schaub there. It has a long story. It is built on previous projects, including the standards that have been developed by the other international organizations, but it is again a sign of the beginning or probably of the consolidation of political willingness to dramatically improve the quality of the interventions we provide. So why we bother with evidence? Why we bother with treatment interventions? Because the time of the legislative processes is amazingly short. We have times that range between the 6 months, maximum 5 years, and evidence is needed to support decision-making. So what we need to do is to start communicate in a way that is functional to the adoption. So to give an example, what we would like to do is to produce evidence that is so perfect that it takes years to be produced. This is something that we cannot allow ourselves any longer. And we have the proof. These are newspapers articles. One is from the White House, in which you have politicians at top level asking for more evidence to respond to drug problems. So we need also a disambiguation, as Wikipedia says. Evidence, unfortunately, is a word that comes from the law enforcement. And in that environment, you have an idea, and then you produce the evidence. This is not what we can do. We cannot find evidence in support of ideas that we have already, because nowadays you find evidence for everything. This is an article mentioning 10 proofs of the existence of ghosts. With the level of information and production that we have, we are misled by the existence of evidence if we are not able to distinguish what is usable, what is helpful to improve our interventions from what is not. Another important fact, so evidence for us means to have a problem, and to search examples of solutions. These examples of solutions are the studies. And then we need to be able to evaluate these studies to see if they are sound, if they are helpful. But another aspect that is becoming increasingly important is the co-production of evidence. We cannot have one word producing the evidence and another bit receiving it. We have to work together. We have to know what are the real problems, and we have to be able to collaborate in the production of this evidence. There are very good examples of organizations that, for example, identify research questions with the patients, because the patients are those that know why do they don't comply. One of the typical problems is that they don't remain in treatment. Who can tell us how to make them stay in treatment if not themselves, their families? So this is one publication that we produced, is translated into 23 European languages, that try to give the meaning of the terms that are used. So, for example, best practice is the name of the project I'm responsible to, is another very abused key term. So we convened a group of experts. John Strang sat there, was among this group of experts that launched this project. And we said, for us, best practice is evidence-based applied to the reality. So it's not what is commonly done, but it's something that needs to be evaluated and proving to be effective. We try to be systematic also in the production of research questions, because one of the frustrations that we quite often have if we talk, for example, about new substances, is that we know that we have a problem, but we don't have evidence. So again, create a dialogue between those that research the evidence and identify the gaps and those that finance the research. We cannot go ahead with this fragmentation among the different stakeholders. We cannot afford it, because also the resources continuously become limited. So why we need to have, as an essential part of a curricula on treatment, the assessment of the level of evidence? Because we pass through a paradox. I start studying in a time in which I was lucky enough, I was brought up in a capital, so I have the National Library, which means I could spend an afternoon searching for a little piece of handwritten piece of paper to search for books. Nowadays, someone that does normal university work is buried by information coming from all the social networks. So if at my time you didn't sleep at night thinking, did I have seen enough? Now probably you didn't sleep at night thinking, among the millions of things that I'm seeing every day, what are the good ones? Can I have the capacity to read everything, or should I make some choices? Doesn't go? The mouse, good. You see? So this is the last picture I would like to show, because the reason why I'm really happy to be here is also because I strongly believe that, especially in time in which our capacity is limited because of the resources, the capacity of collaborating with a different international organization, using our specialization in a synergic way, so that we can, for example, disseminate guidelines that have been produced by WHO, or participate in the standards that are developed by UNODC, I think it's really a big objective per se. I conclude with a little bit of an advertisement. This is a summer school our organization runs each summer. It's a 2 weeks summer school. This year we will focus on the youngest, of course, and if you have someone that you think is interested also in spending 2 weeks in Lisbon, we are more than happy to meet them.